All right. Hi. Yeah. So as Valerie said, I've got a long history. I love being back at the Institute for Human-Centered Design. So always, any excuse to be here, I'm happy for it. Currently, I work for Signify, and I'm a senior customer experience designer for them. When I've been there for almost 3 years now, and largely when I started, what I was doing was actually the first customer experience designer ever hired by Signify. There's got a couple of people in Europe that do similar things, but they don't have the title. And I was really working with large governments and public infrastructure, thinking about what connected lighting can mean for communities, and citizens, and the diversity of citizens that cities have to design for and think about as they're planning. So I started there, and then now I've branched off, so I work across all of our brands and all of our application areas. But I'm going to really focus on actually what connected lighting can mean for cities. So just to give a little bit of a context here, more than half the world's population resides in cities, and that number is growing and continues to grow. That can be challenging. These things are big. There's a lot of stakeholders involved. They're trying to make things better for a vast variety of populations and different communities that all live together in these areas. Plus, cities use a lot of energy. The urban environment takes up about 2% of land, but is responsible for over 70% of energy consumed on our planet. And cities know this, and so when we're talking to people who work in the mayor department, Department of Transits, or even just utilities, we'll be working with. Some of the things that they're sort of most interested in when we're talking about what connected lighting can do and how can we better run smart cities are, obviously they want to affect and plan better for a future that we don't actually know what that future is necessarily going to look like. They want to improve city services. Safety is always a big concern. As well as, most cities have big sustainability initiatives that they're trying to actually do and improve on. And all of this is happening in this world of the Internet of Things, or IoT. So everything is becoming much more connected. And also, frankly, our citizens and across our community are expecting things to be more connected and to work better for them. And cities feel that pressure. So lighting infrastructure is an interesting sort of thing to think about when you're thinking about bringing technology and what can technology do to improve citizens' sort of day-to-day life. Because lighting literally touches all elements of the city. So on the screen, there's sort of a basic drawing of a big city. And it calls out, so for instance, you've got big transportation centers that are coming in and out of our urban environments. Oftentimes, cities have, these beautiful historic bridges or landmarks, things that actually breathe life and the community is quite proud of. Cities run 24 hours a day, so you've got people coming off of graveyard shifts, way early in the morning, you got people going out partying every night, things like that. Those parks and plazas that make up cities, some of the big concerns and the reality, I think most of us feel it, in city, things like air quality, noise levels, they're loud, they're noisy, we're in Boston right now. Cities tend to be hubs for large economic growth, and cities are often proud of this, and they want to sort of offer things like free Wi-Fi for their community. So what I'm going to actually do first is, I'm not going to get very technical, don't worry, but I want to talk a little bit about when I talk about connected lighting and what this can do for your city. Oftentimes, cities are at very different places on this journey. And I think about really connected lighting and smart city sort of experience as a journey. And so we need to meet people where they are. And oftentimes in a city, one community might be a little bit further along than another one, and that's okay. So it's all about trying to understand where people are and how can we sort of design effectively for them. So on the screen, I've got the first level here. I call it step one. And this is really simply by updating your basic infrastructure into a connected ready LED. So on the screen, I've got a street with some pedestrians walking by, cars, vans, and the street lights are sort of going down and then being replaced by simply an LED lighting. So just by going to an LED connected luminaire, you can reduce energy and carbon emissions significantly, which becomes, it's really important. Most cities are aware of this, and also most citizens in their city are aware of it. We know what we're breathing in. We don't want to be adding to this issue. We want to try to be helping. Also, by the pure nature of the light distribution of LEDs, you have an improved safety in terms of pedestrians and people in cars sort of navigating your space. And you have reductions in just maintenance costs and things like that, which can be generally helpful for cities in terms of keeping infrastructure running and updating so it works. The lights stay on longer, so you have less people who have to call in to say that a light's out, just by the nature of the LED. So the second kind of section to this journey that cities end up on, again, I've got an animation on the screen of, again, the same street, and you'll see it's the same lights, but what we've now done is added a node to the top of the light. I think you'll see this. If you kind of walk around the city, you'll start seeing these funny little gray boxes that are on top. That's a node that's communicating out to the rest of the lights and actually back to whoever is managing the lighting system as well within that city or municipality. And then oftentimes you'll see things kind of attached under the light. That's where you have the actual sensors, and I'll get into what those sensors are doing. Or you'll have things like sidecars, where you'll see sensors or pieces of technology attached to the pole. So that all of that is kind of a part of this next level of connected. And then when you're starting to work with cities and talking with municipalities about what this can mean, this is where things start to get very interesting. This is also where cities are starting to kind of step and play around. And you also have some very connected cities that are doing a lot. And again, I've got case studies, so you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. Now, the third level, this is a very advanced city. This is sort of the connectivity, a grid of the future. I feel like the easiest way to kind of explain this is that, I have only ever lived in really old apartment buildings because I like old architecture. Oftentimes, you'll even have things like horsehair glue in your built environment in those old things. And I don't know if anyone's had that experience, but if you're trying to have Wi-Fi in your apartment, if you have one router, it won't go through the walls, or you have dead spots kind of in apartments and in houses and things like that. So tech companies have invented these things called the multiple net kind of Wi-Fi router systems that you can buy. So this is essentially the same technology, except for it's out for a city. And this is how cities start to offer things like free Wi-Fi. Offering 5G and broadband without actually having to dig up roads, which can be so expensive that, frankly, cities don't do it, period. And then once you have this kind of grid, so if we have all of the lights in the city talking to each other, then that becomes a really helpful kind of scaffolding of technology that the city can then kind of play with, depending on, again, what the city wants to do. As Valerie says, I do have a master's in engineering from Imperial. One of my favorite professors there always talked about, look, technology is a tool, just like a hammer, right? A hammer, you can build a house, or you could take a life. This is the same thing. It's sort of it depends on what the city wants to do, and we always need to take a very critical look at what is most important and do that sort of benefit analysis of is the benefit worth the risk? How do we sort of design specifically for that city and that community in mind? But this is the level where you start getting that. And again, on the screen, I've got an animation which shows the street, and then you can see that it starts to create a network across the city in terms of connectivity. So, but how can connected lighting really help a city? Pretty much every conversation I have with cities or people who, even organizations that work with cities, these are the big trends that are kind of pushing their thinking. The first one is about urbanization and safety. The reality here is that every year, nearly 1.5 million people die and millions more are injured or acquire a disability because of road crashes. Pedestrians, I think, I did a risky move walking over here and I felt it. So it's there is a clash between pedestrians and cyclists and cars and infrastructure. This is something all cities know about, and we're trying to get smarter about how we design and make things safer. The other big topic is economic inequity among our cities. During COVID, the digital divide became kind of a hot topic that most people became aware of if we weren't aware of this before. But a digital divide simply refers to inequities that exist between those who have access to internet and digital technology and those who do not. And as we know now, if you don't have broadband, it makes things like doing schoolwork can be more difficult, trying to find a job, accessing healthcare. Virtually everything we do has some kind of connected kind of experience to it. And so when that doesn't work, it becomes very difficult. And then obviously sustainability, big topic. Most cities, all cities are aware of this, trying to do something about it. And resilience. So trying to build resilience in our infrastructure so cities can bounce back when the inevitable disaster strikes our city. And I say inevitable because within my lifetime, I've been experiencing a 100-year storm every year, right? So, and across the planet, 3 in 5 cities worldwide are at a high risk of a natural disaster. This is happening. We as the people who plan cities, think about cities, we just need to think about this in terms of how we're designing our cities and our infrastructure. And again, all in that kind of global trend of IoT and digitization. So, we're still on track, if not even more, might even be beyond this, but 75 billion connected things by 2025. Everything is getting smart. Should it? I don't know. Let's get a drink afterwards and talk about it. But it is. So, the first case study I'm going to talk about here is around really pedestrian safety. So on the screen, again, I've got another nifty little animation of a street, and you've got a parent and a child who, walking around the street, trying to cross the street. First, if we don't have a crosswalk, danger, it's not great. And then suddenly, if you have a crosswalk, it becomes safer. So pedestrians make up nearly a quarter of all deaths from crashes. And pedestrian deaths are rising almost twice the rate of other road traffic fatalities. If you think about this kind of makes sense because the people who are manufacturing our cars have spent a lot of money and a lot of time putting in all types of bells and whistles. So the people who are driving the cars are safe. Like, we are surviving crashes that even my parents would have never survived. But what can we do for people who are not driving in a cage? People who are just on the side of the road. This is where smart city planning can come into place. And so when you install a connected lighting system in a city, on a baseline, you can do things like remote monitoring for pedestrians, which can help infuse data-informed city planning. So, okay, for instance, on a baseline level, if I've just got sensors out on a street, I can count pedestrian flows, and then, I can then make smarter choices and identify. So if I'm in that city plan meeting, okay, look, we've got like this much flow that comes through this area, and there's so many incidents right here, we got to put in a crosswalk. We got to make this safer, and you have data to help back that up. So city plan offices are often really excited about that. And that's just the baseline. So just general monitoring of environment. But if we get into that next level, that third level that cities can be, then you can get actually into like responsive lighting and crosswalks. So for instance, if you're in a city and you got a really big football match or something lets out, you got a big flow of people, the city can actually adapt and let people flow out quickly and then go back to kind of like its normal pattern as usual. Same with emergency response systems, things like that. So you can get really responsive. But again, that's a really advanced city. Most cities are pretty much doing this general monitoring and just using that to do better planning. An example of that is up in Canada, in Belleville, Ontario. In this city, it's about 50,000 residents. The primary focus for this city was sustainability. They wanted to save energy, do their part, but also they really wanted to improve residents' feeling of safety. Now, getting into the sort of sense of feeling of safety when it comes to lighting is an interesting one. But so they replaced all of their streetlights with a connected LED. That you can see that image right up there. It's got the Bellevue water tower in the back. And then you've got one light, and you see that little box on top of that light is a connected node. So by installing these LEDs, the project reduced, the city reduced consumption of over 40% of its energy. So there was a lot of savings there, but most importantly, what the mayor was most interested in and excited about was the fact that by having the LEDs there, people talked about feeling much more safer walking around in their communities at night or at dusk or in the early morning. So it really worked out pretty well for them. The next case study I'm going to talk about, or kind of area that connected lighting can help, is what I'm kind of generally calling lighting on demand. So who here gets really mad at a family member for leaving lights on when you leave the house? Right? Yeah. I feel like we all are either that person or we know or live with that person, right? Cities do this all the time. So in the US alone, outdoor lighting uses about 120 terawatt hours of energy annually. It's a lot. Most of that energy is actually being used to illuminate streets and parking lots. And about 3.3 billion is spent annually on wasted energy and releases about 21 million tons of carbon dioxide a year. That's a lot. All because we're leaving these lights on. So we don't have to. So again, on the screen, I've got an animation. This one's sort of supposed to represent a highway. And as a car goes by, you'll see that the lights will come up. And then if a car is not around, then it starts to dim down again. And this doesn't have to be very dramatic in order to have a lot of benefit for community and in terms of energy saving. I live in Portland, Maine now, but about a year and a half ago, I had an apartment in Cambridge over by like the Fresh Pond area, and I noticed that my streetlights were dimming. And then when I would come outside at night with my dog, they would lift up just slightly. You can do this dimming only by even if it's like 10 to 15%. It's barely noticeable by the human, but it has significant energy savings. Also, this level of control is where we start talking about also dark sky initiatives. So dark sky initiatives was, it's about us, like if you look at satellite images of cities, they're blasting light into the environment. And we know that this has negative effects on birds, on all of these other critters and creatures that live with us in our urban environments. And frankly, we don't have to do it this way. As the designers of lighting, we can be more responsive, we can take into all types of effect. Shielding, there's lots we can do. And dimming is part of that conversation. An example of a city that's doing this currently is Buenos Aires in Argentina. The big goal for Buenos Aires was they wanted to be much more sustainable city. And this is an example of a city that took it in like one step at a time. So they designed their lighting update infrastructure to happen over 3 phases over 3 years. They installed 91,000 new light points across their city. Which ended up being about 75% of all lights in Buenos Aires. And I was actually just there back in November. It's a really fabulous city if anyone gets a chance to see there. So when they installed the new lighting system, they saved about 50% of operational costs, and they started to really implement things like monitoring, switching, and dimming in terms of their different communities and how they kind of laid it out. So that's an example of a city that's really trying to be more responsive and respectful to their community. So the other area is environmental monitoring. So when I'm talking about environmental monitoring, there's really 3 areas that most cities are kind of starting to play around with and think about. The first one is heat mapping. There's something called a heat island effect, but again, I think most of us know if you're in an urban environment, it's hot. It's always hotter than it is out in the rural environment, and it's about 15 to 20 degrees Fahrenheit hotter in an urban environment than it is in just a suburb outside. And we know why this is. This is because of the materials. It's called a concrete jungle for a reason. There's a lot of glass, there's a lot of metal, and all that stuff is just heating up and like baking the city. And so first of all, just walking around the city in a city that's experiencing a heat island effect, is a bummer. But also the people who are inside these buildings are cranking up their AC as well. So you're just, that's, again, this is all building into this problem as to why cities are so unsustainable. But with environmental monitoring, so if we just do passive heat monitoring around the city, then me, again, sitting in city plan office, I can identify some of the hottest areas in the city and put forward plans to change the materials that we're using on our roadways, change street materials, add in more trees and green spaces to try and lower that down, to try and address that issue. So that's heating. The other big area here for environmental monitoring is air quality. So according to the World Health Organization, about 99% of the world's population live in areas that do not hit their standards or guidelines for healthy air. I was just in Mexico City last week, and I developed a horrendous cough, which was very clearly from what I was breathing when I was down there. But this is something that all cities have, and it's actually got the highest rate of, there's all types of health effects that we know breathing in bad air can cause. So again, what can we do about this? If we put out air quality sensors on all of your streetlights, then we as the city can monitor, and on the worst days send out, first there's emergency response that you can do faster and react better to these environments. And you can put out warning systems and advise your community, particularly your most vulnerable communities, that this is going to be a bad day. Here are safe breathing areas that we've identified, that we've got people who can help you, and also just maybe close your windows, put on a mask, do what you can do. And then the third area, which is something that people don't really think about, I think, often, but we're starting this really good science coming out. There was a presenter a few years ago who talked about really fascinating science that she was doing at MIT on noise. So noise and sound pollution is actually the second largest environmental cause of health problems under air pollution. Noise pollution, and I'm not talking about, sure, there's the annoyance of sirens, but just general baseline sound that we experience living in an urban environment has been connected to, yes, sleep disturbance, poor concentration, but also metabolic and cardiovascular disease, and even dementia is now being connected to higher rates of that in people who are living in urban environments that have constant loud noise going on. So again, if we monitor this, then as the city plan office, I can do things. I can put out, again, different materials, put out more green trees, shrubs, things to kind of help dampen that acoustic environment for the city. And I also like to add, particularly for the noise, oftentimes it's on the city to set rules and ordinances around noise. And so if you have more data telling you that the bar district literally is that high, really that loud every single night, you can ticket the bar district. You can and it becomes, frankly, another revenue stream for cities. So, just being honest, working with cities, they're always trying to find ways of paying for these systems, and that's one of the ways that they pay for these systems. An example of a city that's doing this right now is Los Angeles. Los Angeles converted about 140,000 of its 215,000 streetlights. Again, huge savings in terms of energy and reduction of CO2, which is great. But the reason I like to talk about Los Angeles is that this is an example of a city that really is taking kind of almost block by block and community by community approach to how they actually employ and use this technology. So they do these sort of little test beds of hey, in this community, we're thinking about maybe trying to do some of these air quality things. They work with the community and they and then they build it to see if it works. And frankly, if it doesn't work for that community, they take the technology back and they try something else. So they're taking much more of a kind of it's almost an agile approach of working with their community to figuring out what are people comfortable with, what's that cost-benefit analysis, and how does it work for your community, and they're taking that approach to thinking about their lighting infrastructure. So the other piece here and is around economic equity and bridging the digital divide. So again, this is for that third level city. So this is when you have that kind of grid of the future. Really, so high speed broadband coverage is limited. Hold on, this is. Okay, so during COVID, we know that the digital divide became something we're much more aware of. And yes, there's a lot of people in rural environments that don't have access to broadband, but we actually have a significant part of the population that are living inside urban environments that also don't have access to broadband. And if anyone has had any experience kind of working with Department of Transits and things like that, oftentimes to bring that cable of broadband out to a community, you have to dig up an entire street. It halts traffic, it's extremely expensive, and it's extremely time consuming. But if you have, there are several examples of lighting companies that are doing this, where you can add these special systems on top of your street lights that'll actually act like that network system, and that'll bring Wi-Fi out to your communities without having to dig trenches. And so, this removes barrier to entry. So again, no digging, and it can be significantly less expensive. So, and this is, again, it's like we got been talking to a lot of mayors and a lot of city planners that are just like, this is something that they really want to do, but it becomes really difficult. So this is another way of thinking about it, and you can just take advantage of your lighting infrastructure as it is right now. And so the animation on the screen shows a little bit of how it works. So you've got, a city street. If we get those luminaires connected, then it can bring just Wi-Fi and free Wi-Fi out to the community. Mesa is an example of a city, Mesa, Arizona. I'm actually going to be there in 2 weeks. And they did it. Their big goal for updating their lighting infrastructure was that they wanted to bring free Wi-Fi to their community, and also being Mesa, Arizona, dark sky was a really big and important piece of what they wanted to achieve as well with their connected lights. And so again, this is a city that took it in baby steps, right? Like working with large governments, and we've got to take it in baby steps. They identified 4 distinct zones that they wanted to to work with in terms of updating their lighting, because they went with sort of that third level, so it's the high level of connectivity. They were able to have like dashboards, and they can do diagnostics in real time. They can track and see where all their energy use is and actually control where that energy is going. And they brought free public Wi-Fi coverage to the 10 square mile footprint of their downtown area in Mesa. So it's kind of a cool project, and if anyone's in that area, go check it out and look up. Okay, so, and then this other, the coming to the end here, but so the other big thing that connected lighting can do for your community is reduction of operational costs. So oftentimes, and this is a growing urbanization, also this is an equity problem. Oftentimes, the way cities are run right now is that if a light is out in a community, they kind of depend on the community to call them, to say, yo, the light down the road has been out for 2 weeks. Like, can you please bring someone out here to fix this? And oftentimes, it takes a certain amount of those calls before they kind of send someone out, and then they have to send someone out in a truck. It's a truck roll. And they go out and they stare at it, and they sort of poke around, figure out what's going on, what's wrong with it, and then they come back, and they're like, all right, so we think it's this, this, and this. We got to order the parts, wait another couple of weeks. Then you got another truck roll that goes out. That's very expensive and wildly inefficient. So with even just a baseline connected LED, you get much more information about what exactly is going on with the light. And you're not dependent on communities to call you, because we can, those statistics that prove this over and over again, communities that are sort of low income areas, like those people they're working, they're raising their kids, they've got a whole life, they're not going to call the city every time a street is out. And so things are dark often, which is not fair. So the sensors on these lights, they can say, oh, someone hit me and I fell over. Help! Like, I'm down, this is probably what's broken, and you can get a real, so before you actually send someone out, you can pre-order parts and know how to fix it, go out, fix it immediately one day, great, we're done. Also, if you're like in sandy areas, For instance, like when I was working with cities down in Florida or even Mesa, that sometimes poles start to lean and it starts getting kind of dangerous. So you can get a read on that, and so once it crosses a threshold, then people will come out and fix that for you before it becomes really dangerous, because frankly, light poles are really dangerous for communities. There was an architect. I was at an IES conference in Texas, I think a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, and his entire presentation was about how outdoor lighting is really dangerous for people because they fall down. So it's like, okay, let's be aware that we're about to get into a danger zone before it actually becomes an issue. And that's what you can do with some of this, with some of these sensors as well. This is an example from Mexico. It's a community down there, and particularly they are sort of an island, coastal area, a lot of sandy soil, and so their lights were leaning and getting all over the place, and it was like the community was like, we got to do something about this. So it's about 350 inhabitants in this community. They updated their lighting system. It was about 300,000 lights that they introduced, and they were able to get much more responsive in terms of their maintenance and how they were sort of managing this infrastructure in their community. Okay, and so the last kind of case study that I'm going to talk about here is, again, this is sort of like the most advanced of the advanced cities are doing this type of thing, and it falls into that category of also like cities have to get smart about how they're going to start paying for these things if this is what they want to do for their communities. So when you have a grid of the future kind of connected lighting system, then you can put in things like smart parking and traffic. You know, on average, Americans spend entirely too much time in traffic. It's about 51 hours sitting in traffic last year. Frankly, so it's like amount of time in traffic, and also, frankly, being able to find places to park. And one of the things that's also nice about this is that finding accessible places to park can be even more hard in cities. But if you have these, if you have a connected lighting system out, it can identify when there's opening in parking spots or in parking lots where there's located sort of open accessible parking, as well as kind of it can monitor traffic as it's kind of coming and going. This becomes very valuable data that then the city can, if they own it, they can then sell it to, like, for instance, all these smart parking apps. Like, I've got probably 20 because I go to so many cities over the course of the year. They can sell that data, and people can find parking faster. It means less idling, so it's better for the environment. And people just, can find these things faster. Also, you can do things like smart traffic, sort of monitoring and again, adaptive flow. So kind of like what I said for pedestrians, we can do the same thing for cars as they're flowing through the city. So again, if you have an emergency event, you've got to get people to evacuate quickly. The whole system can change to get cars out and make lanes specifically for emergency vehicles to come in. Things like that. And this is the last example that I give. So this is, it's actually a coordination of multiple cities that kind of came together in 2018 under Governor Andrew Cuomo. They wanted to replace at least half of over the 1 million streetlights that make up a couple of these cities in New York State. They put in successfully air quality monitoring systems. So if you're in any of these cities, then if it's a bad air quality day, you'll get alerts on your phone. They set up emergency responses, and the hospitals and people can be ready for that. We know that people are going to come in with some breathing issues. They put out noise sensors, again, sort of general monitoring of sound, so they can update and have better ordinance around that. But also they started implementing incident detection, so God forbid bombs and explosions, but also gunshot detection as well. So you can triangulate where an incident is and people can get there faster. And they started playing with available parking, making that data available to apps so people can get in and out of their city much faster. As well as they have put in public broadband as well. So this is a very advanced set of cities. It's actually, so it's called the NYPA lighting program, NYPA. And it's the nation's largest state public power organization who's kind of come together to do something like this with such a large community. But yeah, so connected lighting's come a long way. It's exciting to see where it's going. But I think, in particular, after working with so many cities, the important thing here is, again, I go back to that hammer thing, right? You got to work with the community about where they are, what they're comfortable with, what makes sense for them, and then kind of go from there, feel it out, and make custom sort of projects, which is why, frankly, Signify has a customer experience designer now to work with the cities to be like, all right, this is entirely your show. I'm just going to help you try to figure out how it makes sense. But yeah, that's me. Any questions?